The only thing harder than waiting on God's timing is wishing you had. But hello and welcome back to my channel. Today's video is titled, God's Way is Always Better, so stop forcing your own. If you are in a waiting season, just so deeply desiring something that God hasn't yet given you, I just know that this Bible story is going to speak to you so deeply. It's filled with gold nuggets that will not only encourage you, but also give you practical wisdom to apply as you wait on God. Before we get into it, I want to take a moment to thank the sponsor of today's video, and that is Hillsdale College. You've probably heard me talk about them before and know I am the biggest fan of the free Hillsdale College online courses, but if you haven't actually checked them out, I'm telling you, you need to just pause this video right now, go sign up for their David story course, then come back and finish this video because y'all, it is that good. The David story course covers, as you would probably guess, David's story as told in the books of 1st and 2nd Samuel, and I decided to take it because I was reading 1st and 2nd Samuel for my quiet time, and I wanted to understand it even more. And the course has unpacked so many powerful insights for me that it actually made me want to go back and read 1st and 2nd Samuel again, just so I could spend some more time on the truths that I learned in the course. The David story course is probably my favorite of the Hillsdale courses, but all of their classes are seriously amazing. I've taken the Genesis story course, Exodus story, Ancient Christianity, Roman Republic. If you are someone who has been wanting to understand the Bible more deeply or just want guidance unpacking it, you have to check out these courses. Like I said, they're completely free. You can start whenever and go at your own pace. And they also have fun little quizzes at the end of each lesson to test your knowledge, which I love. Even when I get questions wrong, I love looking at what the right answer was, which I feel like helps me to remember what I'm learning even more. I cannot recommend Hillsdale online enough. If you want to join me in taking the free David story course or any of the other free Hillsdale College online courses, you can go right now to hillsdale.edu/Kaci to enroll. Again, that's hillsdale.edu/Kaci, and a huge thank you to Hillsdale for working with me on this portion of the video. If you haven't already, please be sure to subscribe to my channel. I make Christian faith and lifestyle content aimed at encouraging you to know God more through His Word and to grow in His likeness, and I would love to have you here. So the story we're going to be looking at today is found in 1st Samuel 8. If you've been following along with the Bible studies I've done on 1st and 2nd Samuel, they're linked above if you want to check out the playlist, you know that I'm backtracking a bit with this video, but like I said, the David story course literally made me want to read these books a second time, and that's how this video came about. So leading up to this point in 1st Samuel, the Philistines, Israel's enemy, have captured the Ark of God, which represents His presence. God does some crazy stuff among the Philistines, which you can read about in 1st Samuel 5, and this eventually makes them return the Ark to Israel. After this, the prophet Samuel calls Israel to repentance, and that brings us to 1st Samuel 8, which is what we're focusing on today. I'm going to start out the passage. I'll have the text up on the screen if you want to follow along. I also encourage you to pull out your Bible. I'm reading from the ESV version. Here's what it says. When Samuel became old, he made his sons judges over Israel. The name of his firstborn son was Joel, and the name of his second Abijah. They were judges in Beersheba. Yet his sons did not walk in his ways, but turned aside after gain. They took bribes and perverted justice. Then all the elders of Israel gathered together and came to Samuel at Ramah and said to him, Behold, you are old, and your sons do not walk in your ways. Now appoint for us a king to judge us like all the nations. So first of all, I want to stop and say that this is heartbreaking. Samuel is one of the godliest men in the Bible, yet his sons weren't walking in the ways of the Lord, which I'm sure broke his heart. It also goes to show that we can't rely on the faith of others. Our faith has to be our own. Because Samuel's sons weren't walking in the ways of the Lord, Israel's leaders basically say, this isn't going to work. Your sons are ungodly and unfit to lead. And while it was wise of Israel's leaders to reject the leadership of Samuel's sons, being that they were not following God, what they asked for instead was not wise. Here's what they said once again, 1 Samuel 8:5. Now appoint for us a king to judge us like all the nations. Now, it wasn't even necessarily wrong of them to want a king. God had already made known that His plan was for Israel to one day have a king. You can look at Deuteronomy 17 to get a little bit more context on that. But what was wrong was their reasoning for wanting a king. They wanted a king so that they could be like all the other nations. The only problem was this was never God's goal for Israel. Again and again and again, God had called Israel to be holy, to be set apart. God wanted to make Israel into something special, but what they wanted was to be like everyone else. Now, I was single for most of my 20s, while many of my best friends were getting married and having 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 babies. And what was hard about that waiting season was not only that I desired marriage, but also I wanted to experience that season alongside the people closest to me. And the fact that God hadn't fulfilled that desire yet meant that my life looked very different than the people around me. And let me just say very clearly, it is not bad to long for the good things we hope God will give us. But God's timing may be different than ours because He may be doing something different in our lives than He's doing in the people around us. And could it be that God is maybe sometimes wanting to do something special in our lives, but we miss it because we just want our lives to look like the lives of everyone around us? Just a little food for thought that verse made me think about. And a little side note, if that is your area of waiting as well, just desiring marriage, desiring a godly spouse, I have an entire devotional that I wrote speaking the truth and encouragement that I myself longed to hear in that season that I'll link down below. It's called My Still Single Devotional. Now let's continue on with today's passage, 1 Samuel 8 verses 6 through 9. But the thing displeased Samuel when they said, "Give us a king to judge us." And Samuel prayed to the Lord. And the Lord said to Samuel, "Obey the voice of the people in all that they say to you, for they have not rejected you, but they have rejected me from being king over them. According to all the deeds that they have done, from the day I brought them up out of Egypt, even to this day, forsaking me and serving other gods, so they are also doing to you. Now then, obey their voice. Only you shall solemnly warn them and show them the ways of the king who shall reign over them." So Samuel was displeased at the Israelite elders' request for a king, maybe because their rejection of his sons stung a little bit, but also because he saw their poor motivation in desiring a king. But even in this, Samuel gives us a beautiful example of what to do when we're feeling displeased or anxious or frustrated, and that is to take it to the Lord. It says that in his displeasure, Samuel prayed. And God then tells Samuel that the people aren't rejecting Samuel, but God. Essentially, he is telling Samuel, don't take it personally. Then, surprisingly, God tells Samuel to give the people what they want. Here's what a note from the Enduring Word commentary says on this. God doesn't tell Samuel to give the people what they want because their request was good or right, but because God would teach Israel through this. Sometimes when we insist on having something bad, God will allow us to have it and then teach us through it. Another note from the Enduring Word commentary on this says, in many ways, this was a matter of timing. God knew Israel would have a king, but he wanted to give the king in his timing. Because Israel demanded a king for bad and carnally minded reasons, God will give them a bad and carnally minded king. Israel will get what they want and will hurt because of it. God had a purpose in not giving Israel a king up to that point. It was because he did not want them to put an ungodly trust in the king instead of a godly trust in the Lord. Now, Israel rejected God's plan and declared they did not want the Lord God to reign over them. And this is why God says the people are ultimately rejecting him, God, not Samuel. So God says, okay, I'm going to give the people what they want, but first, Samuel, I want you to warn them about the king they're going to get. The idea here is that Israel isn't going to change their mind, so God is going to give them over to their desires, but he wants them to have fair warning first so they could make a full informed choice. He also knew that this would give them responsibility in their choice, that they couldn't pretend like they weren't warned this was going to be a bad idea. And I think that a little thing that we can glean from this is that God gives us this warning too. All throughout his word, God gives us instruction on how to live, and when we choose not to heed those instructions, we are forewarned that choosing a way that is not God's way is not going to lead to abundant life. And when we choose to disobey how God is guiding and directing us in our personal lives, we can know that that also is not going to lead to God's best. So here is the warning that God gives Israel through the prophet Samuel. 1 Samuel 8 verses 10 through 18. So Samuel told all the words of the Lord to the people who were asking for a king from him. He said, "These will be the ways of the king who will reign over you. He will take your sons and appoint them to his chariots and to be his horsemen and to run before his chariots. And he will appoint for himself commanders of thousands and commanders of 50s, and some to plow his ground and to reap his harvest, and to make his implements of war and the equipment of his chariots. He will take your daughters to be perfumers and cooks and bakers. He will take the best of your fields and vineyards and olive orchards and give them to his servants. He will take the 10th of your grain and of your vineyards and give it to his officers and to his servants. He will take your male servants and female servants and the best of your young men and your donkeys and put them to his work. He will take the 10th of your flocks, and you shall be his slaves. And in that day you will cry out because of your king, whom you have chosen for yourselves, but the Lord will not answer you in that day." Oof, that is so heavy. What do you notice here as we read this text? What I notice again and again and again is it says that this king will take from you. He appears to be a very selfish king, focused on his own desires and what he can gain from the people. He isn't there to serve the people. He's there to be served by them, which is the opposite of Jesus, who says of himself, "The Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve." When we force something before God's timing, sometimes God will give us what we want and we will hurt because of it, because God's timing, God's plans, and God's ways are best. And this part of the story also shows us that sometimes we think that the thing we desire will solve all of our problems, like the Israelites thought having a king would mean they had someone to judge them and fight their battles. And this was true. A king would do those things. A king would solve some problems, just like the things we desire may solve some of our problems. But also what the Israelites didn't anticipate, that Samuel is making clear to them here, is that getting the thing they desired would also create new problems that they couldn't foresee in this moment, and this is what Samuel was warning them of with a king. 1 Samuel 8:18 says, "And in that day you will cry out because of your king, whom you have chosen for yourselves, but the Lord will not answer you in that day." A note from the Enduring Word commentary says that Israel would later cry out because they wanted a king for unspiritual and ungodly reasons. So God will call this coming king your king Israel, whom you have chosen for yourself, and make it clear that he is the king whom you, Israel, have chosen. If Israel waited for God's king, they would not need to cry out. How powerful is that? How true is this in our own lives? When we do things our way or force things before God's timing, it usually ends up hurting us. We cry out to him in pain or maybe regret, but when we wait on God's timing, this isn't the case. This isn't to say now that, the husband or the job or the parenthood journey or the house or the life God has for you in his perfect timing is going to be perfect or free of any hardship, but it is to say that God's way, God's provision, God's plan is going to be good, and it's not going to make you wish you had waited in the way that forcing your own way will. As I've heard it said before, the only thing harder than waiting on God's timing is wishing you had. But that being said, also know that God is fully capable of redeeming anything. Maybe you've already forced your own way and you're already seeing the negative impacts of doing so. Maybe like the Israelites, you're crying out to God in regret, in remorse. And if this is the case, know that that you are not beyond God's plan for redemption. Even though Saul wasn't God's best for Israel's first king, God ultimately knew that that's what Israel was going to choose. He knew the bad that it would lead to, and he also knew how he was going to redeem that bad in bringing about David next, and ultimately through David, Jesus. Even this misstep of Israel's elders in demanding a king before it was God's timing, that wasn't outside God's sovereignty. And when we force our own way, though it may come with consequences, it also isn't beyond God's ability to redeem. Continuing on with this passage, 1 Samuel 8:19-22, it says, "But the people refused to obey the voice of Samuel, and they said, 'No, but there shall be a king over us, that we also may be like all the nations, and that our king may judge us and go out before us and fight our battles.' And when Samuel had heard all the words of the people, he repeated them in the ears of the Lord. And the Lord said to Samuel, 'Obey their voice and make them a king.'" A final note from the Enduring Word commentary on this part where God commands Samuel to make Israel a king. It says, "This was almost funny. Israel rejected the rule of God, yet they could not escape it because God still appointed their king. God will never step off his throne, even if man asks him to. Yet if we resist the rule of God, we will find that we do not benefit from it in the way that we expect. When we resist God, we only hurt ourselves." This just goes to show again that God is sovereign. He may give us over to our desires that aren't going to lead to his best, and that may cause hurt or unnecessary complication. But even when this happens, God is fully sovereign and fully able to redeem. But it should also give us pause in those situations where we haven't yet chosen to disobey, but we're tempted to. We're tempted to take matters into our own hands, to force our own way when God is telling us differently. In those situations, this story should make us ask ourselves, is it really worth it to force our own way? Because the thing is, we don't have to deal with that hurt and regret and unnecessary complication. Instead, we can choose to trust that God's way really is best and to wait on his perfect timing, even when it doesn't look like our own. I hope this story encouraged you like it did for me. I would love to hear from you down in the comments if you'd like to share a testimony of a time when you were tempted to force your own way. Maybe what happened, what God did through it. I'll be sharing mine in a pinned comment down below as well. And as a reminder, if you want to join me in taking the free David Story course by Hillsdale College, you can head right now to hillsdale.edu/Kaci to enroll. Thank you so much for being with me in this video, and I will see you in my next one. Bye.